Many envision the Wild West as a symbol of progress and the spread of civilization across America. However, frontier settlers often endured more challenging conditions than Romans did 1,800 years prior. We are speaking not of minor distinctions, but of a substantial technological and societal downturn that led to the deaths of countless individuals who might have survived in ancient Rome. Their struggle was not about conquering new frontiers, but about enduring circumstances that the ancient world had long ago mastered. This regression began with a Roman innovation that the Wild West failed to adopt: effective waste management. Ancient Roman sanitation was advanced enough to sustain a city of 1 million people, while the Wild West struggled to keep a town of 500 alive without recurrent disease outbreaks. This represented not a minor setback, but a catastrophic decline in public health understanding. The Romans constructed the Cloaca Maxima, a sewer system so sophisticated that significant portions remain functional today. This extensive subterranean network channeled waste from inhabited areas, averting the disease epidemics that plagued less developed societies. Their engineering was brilliant, utilizing gravity and water flow to maintain urban cleanliness. Roman public latrines were connected to continuous running water that flushed waste into the sewers. Multiple individuals would sit together, conducting business, as the water below carried everything away. While lacking modern privacy, it was sanitary and prevented contamination. In stark contrast, the Wild West relied on outhouses, holes in the ground covered by wooden shacks. Waste accumulated in pits that were never properly sealed or maintained. These cesspools leached into groundwater, polluting wells and spreading disease throughout communities. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery claimed thousands in Wild West towns because human waste contaminated drinking water. These diseases spread via the fecal-oral route, meaning people literally consumed water tainted with sewage. The Romans had resolved this issue 18 centuries earlier. Frontier towns typically dumped chamber pots into streets, leading to waste accumulation in alleys and public spaces, which became breeding grounds for illness. The stench was overpowering, and the health repercussions were lethal. This level of sanitation was medieval, far from the progress Americans claimed to introduce to the West. Some Wild West towns lacked any sanitation infrastructure, with individuals relieving themselves wherever convenient. The ground around settlements became saturated with human waste, which rain then washed into water sources, completing the cycle of disease. The disparity is astonishing. Romans in 100 AD enjoyed superior sanitation compared to Americans in 1870 AD. This was not due to a lack of intelligence among frontier inhabitants, but because they prioritized speed and profit over public health, disregarding centuries of accumulated knowledge. Yet, sanitation was not the sole area of Wild West regression. Medical care was even more dire. Roman medicine was remarkably advanced. They possessed surgical instruments that would not seem out of place in a modern operating room, including scalpels, forceps, catheters, and bone saws. Their anatomical understanding was comprehensive and practical. Roman military hospitals treated wounded soldiers with life-saving techniques. They recognized the importance of cleanliness and infection prevention, even without understanding germ theory. Wounds were cleansed, instruments sterilized, and patients monitored for complications. Roman physicians performed successful surgeries such as cataract removals, bladder stone extractions, and even brain surgery, with surprisingly high survival rates for the era. Opium was used for pain relief, and anesthesia techniques made surgery tolerable. In the Wild West, Doctors were often untrained individuals who simply adopted the title. While some had legitimate medical education from the East, most learned through observation or improvisation. Licensing and professional standards were non-existent. Frontier surgery was often brutal. Amputations were performed with woodworking saws. Anesthesia typically consisted of whiskey or something for the patient to bite on. Infections claimed most surgical patients within days. The mortality rate for even simple procedures was shockingly high compared to Roman medicine. Bloodletting, a discredited practice, was still common, further weakening sick patients and frequently hastening death. A practice Romans had abandoned centuries earlier, yet frontier doctors clung to it. Patent medicines sold in the Wild West were useless or harmful concoctions of alcohol, opium, and random ingredients, falsely claiming to cure everything. Romans, in contrast, had developed effective pharmacology with tested remedies. Frontier medicine was a regression into superstition. Childbirth mortality in the Wild West exceeded that in ancient Rome. Roman midwives had training and experience, whereas frontier midwives were often simply whoever was available. The absence of sanitation and medical expertise led to shocking mortality rates for mothers and infants. The medical regression was so severe that a sick person would have had better survival odds in ancient Rome than in a Wild West town. This is not romanticizing the past, but acknowledging America's abandonment of effective medical practices in favor of rapid expansion and ignorance. Turning to another perfected Roman system, their water infrastructure made frontier wells seem like death traps. Roman aqueducts are renowned for good reason. These engineering marvels transported fresh water from mountain springs to cities dozens of miles away. The Aqua Claudia, for example, stretched over 50 miles, delivering millions of gallons daily. The precision involved was incredible, with gradients calculated to ensure flow without pumps, relying entirely on gravity. Romans understood hydraulics well enough to maintain consistent water pressure over vast distances, constructing bridges to carry water across valleys and tunnels through mountains. The substantial infrastructure investment paid dividends in public health. Rome featured public fountains throughout the city, providing free, fresh water to all citizens. One could walk a few blocks and fill containers with clean water drawn from pristine sources, with water quality continuously monitored and contaminated sources promptly shut down. Wild West settlements, however, dug wells indiscriminately, without regard for contamination. These wells were often situated near outhouses, animal pens, and waste dumps, allowing groundwater to directly introduce pollutants into drinking water. People would fall ill and die without understanding why. Frontier towns near rivers often dumped waste upstream and drew drinking water downstream, using the same water source as both sewer and supply. This invariably led to regular disease outbreaks that decimated significant portions of the population. Water quality in Wild West towns was so poor that alcohol was frequently safer to drink. Whiskey and beer were consumed not only for recreation, but also as a preventative measure against waterborne illnesses. Romans drank water confidently because their infrastructure protected them. Some frontier settlements lacked any reliable water source. Water was either hauled from distant locations or collected from rain. During droughts, residents would die of thirst or be forced to drink contaminated water, leading to death from disease. The contrast is damning. Romans in 50 AD had better water quality than Americans in 1875 AD. This was not an inevitable outcome, but a choice to prioritize rapid expansion over fundamental infrastructure. Thousands perished because America either forgot or ignored proven Roman solutions. The physical structures themselves recount the same story of regression. Roman concrete was so advanced that their buildings have endured for 2,000 years. The Pantheon's dome remains the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. Their formula, involving volcanic ash mixed with lime, was in some ways superior to modern concrete, especially for structures exposed to seawater. This mixture created a chemical reaction that strengthened the concrete over time. Roman structures became harder with age, whereas modern concrete begins deteriorating immediately, a downgrade in construction materials. Roman buildings were designed for longevity, using techniques like arches and vaults to distribute weight efficiently. Their sophisticated engineering means many structures are still in use today, serving their original purposes after 2 millennia. Wild West buildings, conversely, were hastily erected in days or weeks. Wooden structures with minimal foundations would rot, collapse, or burn within years. Most frontier buildings did not last a generation, and those that did required constant maintenance and repair. The quality of construction was abysmal, with gaps in walls allowing in wind and rain, constantly leaking roofs, and uneven, perilous floors. These were not homes built to last, but temporary shelters reflecting the disposable nature of frontier development. Fire regularly devastated Wild West towns because densely packed wooden buildings created ideal conditions for conflagrations, often leading to entire towns burning to the ground and requiring reconstruction. Romans, in contrast, used stone and concrete specifically to prevent such problems. The structural engineering knowledge possessed by Romans was entirely absent in frontier construction, resulting in collapsed buildings that killed occupants and failed bridges that drowned travelers. This regression in construction knowledge constantly claimed lives. A Roman citizen from 100 AD transported to a Wild West town would have been appalled by its primitive construction. They would have found it inferior to what their society had accomplished a millennium earlier. The Wild West signified not advancement, but a decline. This decline was also evident in the way towns were structured and designed. Roman urban planning was intricate and deliberate. Cities were organized in grid patterns, with roadways intersecting at right angles, making navigation simple and allowing for efficient movement of people and goods. Planning occurred before construction commenced, and zoning separated residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. Romans understood that combining these functions led to issues. Noisy, malodorous industries were kept away from homes. Markets had designated areas, and public buildings occupied central positions. Public spaces were crucial to Roman cities. Forums served as gathering points for trade and politics, while parks and gardens offered leisure. The city was crafted for human use and enjoyment, not solely for economic purposes. Wild West towns, in contrast, developed chaotically, devoid of any planning. Buildings were erected wherever owners wished, creating irregular streets that led nowhere. The layout was dictated by whoever arrived first and claimed land, rather than by rational design. Saloons, brothels, and legitimate businesses were haphazardly intermixed. Residential areas bordered industrial operations, and the accompanying noise, smell, and danger made life unpleasant. No one considered livability, as no one thought long-term. Streets in frontier towns were either mud pits during rain or dust bowls in dry weather, lacking paving, drainage, or maintenance. Walking through town meant trudging through filth, and horses and wagons frequently got stuck. Infrastructure was non-existent. Public spaces were largely absent in most Wild West towns. There were no parks, no planned gathering areas, and no consideration for community needs beyond commerce. The town's purpose was wealth extraction, not quality of life provision. This stark contrast highlights a fundamental difference in values. Romans constructed cities intended to endure and serve citizens for generations, while Wild West towns were hastily assembled for quick profit, with no thought for sustainability or livability. One civilization built for the future, the other exploited the present. This divergence in values also extended to personal hygiene and public health. Romans bathed daily in public bathhouses, which were architectural and engineering marvels. These weren't merely places to cleanse. They were social hubs, with hot and cold pools, steam rooms, and exercise areas. The largest could accommodate thousands simultaneously. The hypercaust system heated water and rooms using underground furnaces, circulating hot air beneath floors and through walls, creating comfortable temperatures. This sophisticated and effective central heating system provided a luxury not seen again for over 1,000 years. Bathing was deemed essential for health and social standing. Romans visited the baths daily, spending hours socializing while maintaining hygiene. The combination of hot water, steam, and scraping with strigils kept people remarkably clean. The Wild West lacked bathing infrastructure. Most individuals went weeks or months without bathing. Water was scarce, and heating it was labor-intensive. Bathing was considered an occasional luxury, not a daily necessity. Frontier inhabitants smelled. The amalgamation of sweat, dirt, and lack of washing created odors that would be intolerable today. However, since everyone smelled similarly, it was accepted as normal. The health ramifications were severe, but overlooked. Lice, fleas, and other parasites infested everyone. Without regular bathing and clean clothes, these pests were unavoidable, spreading diseases and making life miserable. Romans had largely eradicated these issues through their bathing culture. While some Wild West towns eventually built bathhouses, they were rare and costly, and most people never used them. The cultural attitude toward hygiene had regressed to medieval levels. Cleanliness was neither valued nor prioritized. A Roman citizen would have been appalled by the squalor of frontier life, deeming it barbaric and primitive compared to their own standards. The Wild West represented a significant setback in public health and personal hygiene. The food situation presented a similar narrative of regression and loss of knowledge. Roman cuisine was varied and sophisticated, with access to ingredients from across their empire and elaborate recipes. Cookbooks from that era showcased intricate dishes with multiple ingredients and cooking techniques, treating food as an art form and a pleasure. Romans preserved food through various methods: salting, smoking, drying, and fermentation all extended shelf life. They made garum, a fermented fish sauce that added flavor and protein to dishes. Their preservation techniques allowed for diverse diets year-round. The Roman diet included vegetables, fruits, grains, meats, fish, and dairy in various combinations, making meals balanced and nutritious. Even common people had access to diverse foods through markets that brought goods from across the empire. Wild West food, however, was monotonous and nutritionally deficient. Beans, salt pork, and hardtack were staples. Fresh vegetables were rare, and fruit almost non-existent. The diet was heavily reliant on preserved meats and starches, with little variety. Scurvy was prevalent on the frontier due to a lack of vitamin C, a disease Romans had unknowingly prevented through their varied diet, but which killed and incapacitated thousands of frontier people. The solution was simple: eat fresh produce, but it was unavailable. Food preservation in the Wild West was limited to crude salting and drying techniques, often resulting in spoilage. Contaminated food frequently caused illness. Romans possessed superior preservation methods that the frontier had either forgotten or never learned. Cooking methods were primitive, mostly occurring over open fires with minimal equipment. Romans had sophisticated kitchens with multiple cooking surfaces, ovens, and specialized tools. The culinary technology had significantly regressed. A Roman would find frontier food barely edible. The lack of seasoning, poor quality ingredients, and limited variety would seem like poverty food, which, in many ways, it was. The Wild West diet was inferior to what Romans had enjoyed nearly 2 millennia earlier. This pattern of decline extended to intellectual and cultural life. Literacy in ancient Rome was widespread, especially in urban centers. Public schools taught reading, writing, and mathematics to children of all social classes. The ability to read was considered vital for civic participation. Roman libraries were public institutions that preserved and disseminated knowledge. The Library of Celsus in Ephesus housed thousands of scrolls, allowing citizens free access to information and literature. Education and knowledge were valued and state-supported. Written communication was common in Rome. People wrote letters, maintained records, and documented their lives. Graffiti in Pompeii reveals that even common people could write, demonstrating that literacy was a basic skill, not a rare achievement. The Wild West, conversely, was largely illiterate. Most people could not read or write beyond signing their names. Education was infrequent and brief. Children, if fortunate, attended school for a few months before returning to full-time labor. Books were expensive and scarce on the frontier. Most families owned no books at all, perhaps only a Bible, if religious. The concept of public libraries did not exist in most frontier towns. Knowledge was oral and limited. Written contracts and records were rare because most people could not read them. Business was conducted on handshakes and trust, leading to disputes and fraud that written documentation could have prevented. The intellectual regression was profound. Romans in 100 AD were more literate than Americans in 1870 AD in many frontier areas. Not because Romans were inherently smarter, but because they valued education and established systems to provide it. The frontier prioritized immediate economic productivity over long-term intellectual development. A Roman would be astonished by the ignorance and illiteracy of frontier people, perceiving it as a sign of civilizational collapse, not progress. The Wild West represented a dark age in American intellectual life. The legal system exhibited an equally dramatic regression from Roman sophistication to frontier chaos. Roman law was codified, written, and systematically applied. The 12 Tables established legal principles that protected citizens and ensured predictable justice. Laws were public knowledge, and citizens understood their rights and obligations. Roman courts had procedures and standards. Evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and judges made decisions based on law rather than personal whim. The system, though imperfect, was far more advanced than what followed Rome's collapse. Legal representation was available, with advocates arguing cases for clients. While the wealthy had advantages, even common people could access the legal system. Justice was imperfect, but systematic. The Wild West, however, was characterized by vigilante justice and mob rule. Lynchings were common and accepted. Accused criminals were often hanged by mobs without trial, evidence, or any legal process. The rule of law was barely present in many areas. Frontier trials were often a farce, a swift hearing with no genuine evidence, followed by immediate execution. The accused had no rights, no representation, and no appeal. Justice was whatever the mob decided in the moment. Law enforcement officers were often as criminal as the outlaws they pursued. Sheriffs and marshals abused their power, accepted bribes, and committed crimes themselves. The badge did not symbolize law and order. It represented whoever was toughest and most willing to use violence. Property rights were established through force. Disputes over land were resolved by intimidation and violence rather than legal process. The strong seized what they desired, leaving the weak without recourse. A Roman citizen would have considered such frontier justice to be utterly barbaric. They lived under a legal system that, while imperfect, was vastly superior to the lawless disorder of the Wild West. This descent from Roman law to frontier violence signified a societal collapse. The infrastructure for travel and commerce displayed a similar deterioration. Roman roads were engineering marvels that endured for centuries. Constructed with multiple layers of materials, adequate drainage, and meticulous grading, these roads could accommodate heavy traffic in all weather conditions. Many remain in use today, 2 millennia later. The extensive road network connected the entire empire, allowing travel from Britain to Egypt. Milestones marked distances, and the state maintained these routes, ensuring relatively safe and efficient journeys. Roman roads, paved with stone, provided smooth surfaces that resisted turning into mud during rain. Their engineering incorporated crowned surfaces for drainage and roadside ditches to divert water, emphasizing longevity and practicality through meticulous detail. In contrast, Wild West trails were mere dirt tracks that became impassable in adverse weather. Rain transformed them into muddy quagmires, where wagons could remain mired for days. Dry conditions generated choking dust clouds for travelers. There was no maintenance or improvement. Bridges in the Wild West were rudimentary wooden constructions that frequently washed away. Rivers often necessitated fording, risking drowning and the loss of goods. The infrastructure for overcoming natural barriers was primitive and perilous. Travel times in the Wild West were unpredictable and protracted. A journey that might have taken days could stretch into weeks if weather turned foul or unforeseen obstacles arose. Romans could accurately forecast travel durations due to the dependability of their roads. The absence of proper road infrastructure isolated frontier communities and hampered trade, making goods costly because transportation was so arduous. While Romans had resolved these issues with their road network, America had to relearn these lessons. A Roman engineer would have been appalled by frontier roads, recognizing them as inferior to what their civilization had constructed almost 2 millennia prior. The Wild West represented a significant regression in transportation infrastructure. Even the financial system highlighted how far civilization had declined. Romans boasted a sophisticated banking system encompassing loans, deposits, and money transfers. Banks operated across the empire, enabling merchants to conduct business without carrying substantial amounts of coinage. Letters of credit could be utilized in distant cities. Roman currency was standardized and trustworthy, with coins of consistent weight and purity. This monetary system facilitated trade over vast distances, with economic activity underpinned by a reliable financial infrastructure. The Wild West presented financial chaos. Multiple currencies circulated simultaneously: gold, dust, various coins, and paper money from banks of dubious stability, all vying for acceptance. No one definitively knew the true value of anything. Banks frequently failed, wiping out depositors' savings without any insurance or protection. One's money could vanish overnight if a bank collapsed or a banker absconded. Trust in financial institutions was minimal, and justifiably so. Credit was informal, based on personal relationships, and interest rates were exorbitant. The absence of regulated banking fostered widespread exploitation. Romans had developed superior financial systems that the frontier had discarded. Thus, it is evident that the Wild West was not more advanced than ancient Rome. In nearly every measurable respect, it constituted a considerable step backward. Worse sanitation, worse medicine, worse infrastructure, essentially, worse everything. The frontier encapsulated regression, not progress. This compels one to question the mythology surrounding American expansion, does it not? Those Romans would have been horrified by frontier conditions, recognizing them as barbarism, not civilization. The Wild West was not the future. It was a temporary return to a darker past that America eventually transcended. Nevertheless, for decades, Americans lived in conditions inferior to those of Romans nearly 2,000 years earlier, and thousands perished as a consequence.